In 2015, the countries of the world made a united promise to make sure that every man, woman and child has access to the basic necessities of life. Education, clean water, equality, food, jobs, healthcare. The things no one should have to live without. Agenda 2030 of the United Nations and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals is the roadmap that we will use to get there. The SDGs target poverty and hunger, the need for improved health and education, gender equality and access to economic growth. They also address climate change and the need for safe, sustainable communities. Today, with just 10 years left to achieve Vision 2030 and a global pandemic which is causing devastating setbacks to the poor and the most vulnerable, we are at a turning point. Governments have a very important role to play, but stand a better chance of achieving these goals if the contributions of faith-based organisations are recognised and harnessed. While religion is often overlooked in sustainable development, faith communities are working hard to make sure these goals are met. For over 80% of the world's inhabitants, life is lived through the prism of one religious belief system or another. In many parts of the world, the role of the faith leader can extend beyond religious guidance to peacemaking, security, and social care. Faith-based organizations and their leaders have deep ties to their communities. They also collectively own significant resources and constitute a major global economic power. Around the world, thousands of faith communities are distributing food, securing access to water, supplying medical help, and social services. They are also providing educational opportunities, housing, and support to small businesses and local economies. Their work crosses political borders, cultural and religious boundaries through interreligious partnerships and a commitment to dialogue in order to ensure sustainable development. To highlight the importance of such efforts in achieving these goals, KAICIID is releasing the #Faith4SDGs project, a digital storytelling series that reveals the enormous contributions faith-based organizations around the world are making to help implement the SDGs. We'll bring you through alleys and valleys, to villages and cities, inside homes, classrooms, businesses, and houses of worship, to witness firsthand how faith-based organizations are working in harmony with the SDGs. From every major religion and in every part of the world, these organizations, motivated by charitable principles common to all faith traditions, are working to ensure that no one is left behind. As we work to achieve Agenda 2030, KAICIID is working to build new partnerships between the United Nations, governments, civil society and religious institutions based on a shared vision and shared goals, with people and planet at the centre. Follow #Faith4SDGs to learn more.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this discussion on how faith communities are contributing to the achievement of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. So this discussion has been ongoing for several decades now, but I feel that it is given a certain urgency at this time because of the unique circumstances that we as a global society are living through. On every single indicator, COVID-19 threatens to backsliding on the achievement of the SDGs, and we have to admit that they were challenging enough to begin with. But Agenda 2030 is such a compelling process, and I think its appeal and its power comes partly from the fact that it is a global, universal commitment to solidarity, to ensuring that people everywhere have the best possible chance to secure the lives that they deserve. We only have 10 years to go and much less on some themes such as, for example, climate change. So this seems like a really tremendously important time to evaluate how we can work together better to make these goals a reality. As I mentioned, the role of faith-based actors to achieving the SDGs is an often discussed topic, especially within our field. There are a lot of statistics which are quoted, doubted, and then quoted again. For example, that religious organizations are arguably the fourth largest group of investors in the world. Some studies suggest that FPOs are the fourth largest economic power in the world. That zakat donations, even conservatively estimated, add up to about $200 billion a year, representing a tremendous contribution to poverty alleviation. But I think that what makes KAICIID's new project, Faith4SDGs, interesting is that we were able to capture, or at least we attempted to capture, the individual community level impact of religious organizations, FBOs, and religious actors to achieving the SDGs. So providing food to the hungry, education as a way out of forced marriage, solar power plants to underserved communities. And when we went looking, we found literally hundreds of stories like this. So each of the stories that we are telling over the next week through the videos that you will see, hopefully that you'll be able to join us for, is only a stand-in for hundreds of others just like them. And yet at the same time, there's often a sense that FBOs have to knock on the doors of the international policy community to have their voices heard, that their contributions can sometimes be underappreciated or overlooked. So why is this the case? The World Council of Churches, in a publication on the SDGs, talked about faith actors being a force out in the wilderness. Is that still the case? And how can we ensure that religious actors are situated in the achievement of Goal 17, in some ways the most important one of them all, Global Partnership for Sustainable Development? We're very lucky to have with us today 5 speakers who've been grappling with these issues for many, many years. They come to us from the UN, from funding organizations, from FBOs, and in many cases, they tick more than one of those boxes. And of course, for KAICIID, which exists to bridge these gaps and to bring religious communities and policymakers into closer, more constructive collaboration, the answers to these questions hold tremendous importance. So just before we start, some house rules, which I'm sure I don't need to repeat in this age of Zoom, but you should be informed that we are recording and will publish this webinar to the internet. So if you need to leave early or want to revisit a section or share it with your friends in your community, please do so by visiting our website. Before I move to introduce our speakers, I'd also like to invite our participants to introduce themselves if they would like, stating their name and which organization they represent. And at the end of the webinar, we will post a very short evaluation form, and we would really appreciate it if all of our participants would take the time to fill it out, because it really helps us to know what we can do to serve our community better. So with that being said, I'd like to hand over now to the Secretary General of KAICIID, His Excellency Faisal bin Muammar. Your Excellency, if you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how KAICIID sees the role of FBOs in Agenda 2030.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am really honored to speak to you today, ladies and gentlemen, and it's really honored also for KAICIID to host all of you. Let me begin by thanking our panelists for accepting our invitation to speak today. His Excellency, Dr. Bandar Hajjar, thank you very much. I know you have a busy schedule and you devoted your time to debate with us, and we are grateful to your presence with us. You are leading one of the most important institutions in the Islamic world. And to my dear friend, Dr. Azza Karam, thank you, Religion for Peace. I will never forget Religion for Peace. By the way, I started learning Religion for Peace when I started with them. Maybe I will not tell you how many years ago, but it is really a pleasure always to work with Religion for Peace. And also to Dr. Yvonne Hela, thank you very much, Dr. Hela. You know, you're a representative of the UNDP administrator for the programs of to the Palestinian people. And to His Excellency, Dr. Ayad Abu Mughli, of the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, for Earth Initiative. And to Her Excellency, Dr. Esther Liman Sow, thank you very much, the Global Director of Faith and Development of World Vision. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to have you all with us. We are all here today because we agree that the influence of religious actors makes them a unique force for good in the world. Not only the power, the role. You know, I would love to use the role of, not the power. The power sometimes is misinterpreted. All of us are here because we are convinced of the power of religious leaders, or the role of religious leaders to contribute to the global agenda. It is an often quoted fact that 8 out of 10 people in the world hold a religious belief, or we say 80% of the people. As you know, KAICIID is built on the view that interreligious dialogue and the inclusion of faith actors has a fundamental role in the human development agenda. It's very important for us. Dialogue can play a central role in advancing the sustainable development, by enhancing coordination, and by emphasizing important values such as respect and inclusion. Last year, a KAICIID fellow summed up the role of religion in his country, Nigeria. He said, Nigeria, like so many parts of the world, runs the wheel of religion. Religion is everywhere, governing every aspect of life. Eat it, breathe it. Government listen to religious leaders. Everyone listen to religious leaders. How can they not be central to Agenda 2030? This is really strange if they are not. For me, that sums up the vital role of religion in the SDGs. How can they not be involved? Unfortunately, for many in the international community, this is becoming clear. After all, in many African countries, religious actors provide between 30% of health services as part of goal number 3. Worldwide, they contribute immensely to goal number 4. For all. Religious charity organizations are fighting to achieve goal number 1, zero poverty. They are instrumental in guiding the debate around goals 12, 13, and 16 through a focus on value-based, morally driven ways of living. We have found through our as we have found with our storytelling projects, they are providing food, clean water, investing in new forms of energy, inclusive education, and promoting gender equality. We did whatever we can to do these videos. You know, we've been working in these videos for the last 3 years, and we went everywhere in the world to record their achievement. It was really an excellent journey, and we learned a lot to contribute their work, or to bring their work to agenda, to the sustainable development agenda. But the inclusion of religious entities into Agenda 2030 carries with it unique challenges, often a disconnect between the theological discourse of faith-based organizations and the secular human rights narrative, international and national actors. This is the gap that KAICIID seek to bridge our work and your work by training grassroots actors in dialogue, both religions and with the policymakers, through the KAICIID Fellows programs, by building platforms which provide safe spaces for religious leaders to policymakers and share challenges in their communities, which are often related to things like food, water, and the clean environment, by constructing and supporting channels of communication between international organizations and faith-based actors. For example, the African Union Interfaith Dialogue Forums and the European Policy Forums on Migration and Refugees. We also work at the global level, helping to build the gap between policy actors and religious institutions through concrete shared actions. For example, with the United Nations Alliance of Civilization and the UN Office on Genocide Prevention. This is what we try to do the last 8 years. And because of the unique structure of KAICIID, we're funded by 4 countries, and our multi-religious board of director, we were able to enhance the role of religious leaders to connect with policymakers. Thank you very much. I am looking forward to listen to all of you. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, especially for pointing out the tremendous importance of religious leaders in many, if not all, societies, and the need for closer linkages in a sustained manner between governments and religious actors. I'd now like to turn to Dr. Bandar Hajar, President of the Islamic Development Bank Group. Dr. Hajar leads a development bank that works to promote social and economic development in its 57 member countries and Muslim communities around the world, and whose work directly impacts on at least 12 of the 17 SDGs. Dr. Hajar, I wonder if you could tell us more about how you see the role of religious organizations in the achievement of Agenda 2030.
Good morning, afternoon, evening to all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allow me first to thank my friend, His Excellency Faisal bin Muhammad, Secretary General of the International Dialogue Center, for having invited the Islamic Development Bank to this discussion around the faith and sustainable development. I am very honored to be with you today, representing an institution that almost half a century old and was established on the firm belief that the core ethical values embedded in Islamic finance instrument can significantly impact communities, cities, and nations' life and livelihood. We are not a religious organization as such. We define ourselves as an international organization that serves its member countries through financial and non-financial support that is rooted in a set of values and principles inspired by religious teaching, but that are in fact universal. The Islamic financial model is based on the principle of sustainability, fairness, and equality. It considers the social, environmental, and governance factors in any decisions related to investment. This model's universality is derived from the universal nature of the principles and values it upholds. So as you indicated in my intervention at the G20 Interfaith Forum, for which allow me to congratulate again the International Dialogue Center, and it was a real success. In one of our reports in 2015, we established a direct relationship between the use of Islamic finance principle is addressing 9 out of 17 SDGs. Indeed, the core principle of our financing to be risk sharing and asset-based, as it is necessary that our financing contribute to the real economy, support the developing countries to build modern, resilient, and needed economic and social infrastructure. We have, for instance, Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development that was created from Awqaf donation, meaning the endowment that has launched last year, FAST program to bring out of school children back to education. This is done in partnership with other organizations. So it has SDG 17, and it contributes directly to the achievements of SDG 4 for education. Another example is the economic empowerment approach, where we use all available Islamic finance instruments to create concrete business opportunities at various levels of the value chain. So it is sustainable, it lifts people out of poverty, and brings development at a very level, it has already proven its success in Benin, Palestine, Tunisia, Yemen, empowering the people to build their own future and the future of their community and society. We want really to shift the people from depending on aid to empowerment. So this is very important, and this can be done with the partners in every sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, especially for that fascinating glimpse into the way that your organization works around the SDGs. Since I know that you have to leave us shortly, I'm going to directly follow up with a second question, if that's okay, which is about what we discussed earlier, which is COVID-19. So could you tell us, so I'm interested in how you see the financial and economic impacts of COVID-19 affecting the achievability of the SDGs, and what religious institutions can do to help mitigate these.
Yeah, see, Islamic economic principle advocate to leave no one behind. And that economic activity should aim to meet one's own needs and contribute to spreading good in society. This is why the non-profit sector has a major place in our thinking. Take, for instance, the traditional Islamic philanthropy tools and programs such as zakat, sadaqah, waqf. This non-profit sector has been crucial in this last crisis that we all still in. Our member countries will need our support to develop it further. When society, when the social safety net system are not available or not developed or resilient enough, so it is this non-profit sector that can protect the livelihood of the poorest. An Agenda 2030 is the framework of the whole international community has agreed, and we are committed as MPP, present 57 member countries, to support our people to achieve this goal. In our constituency, we have 29 fragile states as defined by OECD. 70% of the global refugees and internally displaced people are from our member countries. 8 out of 12 refugee hosting countries are also member countries. So our responsibility is big, and we have shifted our business model to be able to be worthy of this role. So at the IDB, since I have taken the office in 2016, we decided to focus on developing capacity in science, technology, innovation. Reducing the threat posed by disasters will need new technology solutions and innovation, but that are elaborated domestically by the people who know best their environment. I am honored to indicate that here we have the Transform Fund has received expressions of interest from more than 122 countries to the latest launched $1 million special allocation. Another pillar of the transformation of the ISTB that is close to my heart is the move from development bank to a bank of development and developers. Developers means public, private, university, research centers, NGOs, civil societies, and so on. I will conclude my sharing with you that we need to leave behind the 3 Ps, which we always talk about, public-private partnership, and go towards 5 Ps, public-private philanthropist people partnerships. This is how we will succeed in helping the most vulnerable ones and build more resilient world. Because the nature and magnitude of the challenges facing our world today are huge and beyond the capacity of any individual group or countries or institutions. And also we are living in a very fast changing world. So if we don't really work together and do business collectively, we will not be able to address all these challenges, regardless of the religion, color, faith, whatever. So we are working in these 50 Pacific countries. A lot of these countries, some of the population, they are Muslims, and some of them, they are non-Muslims. So we work. And in fact, the Islamic Development Bank contributed in establishing many schools in non-member countries and in Muslims community in non-member countries. And this school, both Muslims and non-Muslims, they are studying at this school in France, in other many countries. So we look at development from this perspective, development in how to improve the life of the people. We are involved with improving the life of 1.7 billion people around the world, 1 out of 5 in the world population. So here I will stop here. Once again, I would like to really express my sincere thanks and appreciation for inviting me. And also I wish to continue with you, but I have also another meeting with anti-corruption under the G20 umbrella. So I got ready to move, to leave. So thank you once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for taking the time to join us. You raised two very interesting points, which would have been great to elaborate on: the role of religious communities in disaster risk reduction, and also how the nonprofit sector is relevant in cases of lacking governance. But again, thank you so much for your time, and good luck with your other meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bandar. Thank you.
I'd like to turn now to Dr. Aza Karam, who in many ways really pioneered this field during her time with the UNFPA through the creation of the Multi-Faith Advisory Council and the Interagency Task Force on Faith and Development. So my question to you, Dr. Karam, would be, how have you seen the relationship between faith-based actors and the United Nations and other policy actors change in the course of the past decade or so? So I think it's undeniable that the UN has a greater recognition and respect for religious actors and their contribution. But is there also, in your opinion, a greater sense of how to involve them as equal players, or is that still a challenge?
Thank you very much, Narayan, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today, Dr. Faisal, and my colleagues and old-time friends from UNDP and UNEP. It's absolutely lovely to see you. World Vision was actually one of the very first organizations that the UN system was very diligent in reaching out to. So Esther, I'm very happy to see you here as well. I think this is a really important question, Nayana, and I think indeed the UN has come a long way from the time that at least we started to serve together in the early 2000s. I would say that even if you just take a look at some of the remarkable work that Dr. Iyad Abu Mughli, who I'm sure will speak to it himself, has been doing in the last 4 to 5 years, you'll see this massive sea change in an orientation of the UN actors. There are specific areas in which the UN has a history of engaging with religious actors. Children's rights is one of the oldest and very, very prominent areas, and so much has been done about this, but environment comes very close, and we're talking about engagement since the 1970s. Now, the issue here isn't whether the UN and the multilateral system have engaged with religious actors before or not, because ever since the multilateral system has existed, of course it's had to engage with religious actors. It's not like we woke up 20 years ago and thought, oh my goodness, religion, it exists. That isn't quite how it has happened, and it will never happen that way. one of the first things I learned working from a New York headquarter context of the UN system was that the New York, Geneva, Rome, Vienna offices of the New York entities were not quite familiar actually with what some of their own country office entities were already doing and had been doing for some time with religion and religious actors. So that awareness that peters from, if you will, the local or national context of UN and EU and AU engagement all the way to the headquarter office, that particular percolation needed to happen. And I think what we've noticed in the last few years is that it has indeed happened at a much quicker rate, so that the tea or the coffee that we are now drinking is well brewed, so much so from both national, regional, and global context. The issue is, I believe, not that, oh, religious actors have something to learn or the UN has something. Of course, everybody has something to learn. We're all created to learn all our lives. The issue is, what are we doing in a very coordinated, cohesive engagement fashion with some of our religious actors, and how are the perceptions on both sides of the space, if you will? What I found always fascinating is that some of the secular policymakers suddenly wake up and say, oh, my father was a pastor, or I did my MA in theology, and you suddenly think, well, really, and you didn't obviously the percolation wasn't going on there either. Now that, like I said, the percolation is happening. One of the concerns, though, Nayana, that I think we have to be very conscious of is that some of us seem to think that we're discovering something new, and that's a bit dangerous, because religious actors are actually the oldest political, social, financial, cultural, economic, you name it. They're the oldest policy makers that history has ever known of humankind. So for us to now assume that we're going to discover them and they're now going to be positioned with secular policy, we need to appreciate that we're dealing with the original communities of our existence. Religious leaders were the first presidents and prime ministers and program officers ever. Their way of serving communities has been ancient, will continue long after our currently existing infrastructure of governments and ministries and syndicates and unions. These religious actors will continue to, they predate us, they will continue to exist long after our institutions, which are, by the way, really close to being a bit defunct. We're looking at institutions that will continue for a long time. The question is, how humble are the secular policymakers about this engagement on the one hand, but also how careful are we to appreciate that it isn't the kindness or the magnanimity of the secular institutions to engage with religious actors and teach them how they need to be. That approach is a bit problematic, and I'm being very diplomatic. The question is that we must be aware of the fact that religions, because there's an institutional memory that is the human kind memory, are much more capable of instrumentalizing the secular establishment than the secular establishment thinks itself capable of instrumentalizing the religious. And that aspect of being smart and strategic in engagement has to be uppermost on the minds of those of us who are responsible for working on all sides with the secular and with the multi-religious. The second thing we have to be absolutely conscious of, that I think we're not, is that multi-religious engagement. And this is why what the UN and what the KAICIIDs and our members of the interfaith community are very conscious of is we have to, it's the multi-religious imperative. It's not good enough to work with only one religious institution, no matter how powerful and amazing they are. They are each incredibly powerful and amazing, by the way. But we have to be very deliberate in engaging multi-religiously. And what the SDGs have been informing us, and before them the MDGs, is that we have to be multi-stakeholder oriented. Goal 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda was also present in the MDG agenda. Partnerships has always been on the table. The issue is, how do we become deliberately multi-stakeholder? And that means, per definition, multi-religious. And it's important for us to be sensitive to the fact that if we mobilize every single religious actor and community, it still isn't enough. We still have the secular counterparts to take into account. Our civil society is our fundamental nervous system. Civil society is the nervous system of any infrastructure as we know it today, whether it's national or regional or global. Our civil society has to fundamentally be sensitive to and integrating of the multi-religious space, not just the one Catholic or the one Muslim institution. It has to be multi-religiously integrative. Those are some of the lessons that we need to be deliberate about: the humility, the multi-stakeholder, multi-religious dynamic and approach. And I think we're not necessarily there yet, but we are absolutely getting there. Religions for Peace has 90 interreligious councils around the world. Lesson learned from 50 years ago that we were able to and continue to learn in partnership with KAICIID, with the Parliament of World Religions, with the United Religions Initiative, with many of the interfaith organizations. One of the lessons we're learning is precisely that of understanding that what has to be shared in terms of knowledge is already within the community of religious institutions coming together. No one can tell one another what to do, and we should not, as multilateral entities, whether religious or secular, we should not be in the business of telling people what to do. We're in the business of listening and absorbing the learning that needs to happen, bearing in mind that the very important horizon that has to inform everything we do has to be human rights. Has to be human rights. We don't deviate to accommodate certain religious positions and institutions because it's a bit touchy and iffy and problematic. No, we have a universal agenda. It's called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That has to be our agenda. If we are now beginning to prioritize religion at the expense of human rights, we are harming the world big time. And working on human rights also means we cannot select. This right is important. Let's work with the religions on that one because that's really important. The rest we can afford to ignore. No, human rights are indivisible. You can't do one and forget the other. You cannot do one at the expense of the other. And unfortunately, when we start working with religious communities, we are sometimes forced to choose which human right because we can't talk about them all. And that's the wrong choice. When we get to that crossroads, you understand that you've already taken a wrong turn. When you get to that crossroads where you have to choose which human right you're going to stand up for and support the religions to stand up for, you've got already a wrong turn. Our main parameter has to be, especially in these times, when the very legitimacy of every single institution, legal, executive, and otherwise, when the very legitimacy of our institutional infrastructure is being so threatened globally, we have to prioritize the entirety of the human rights agenda. Never before in our history, since 1945, has human rights become so absolutely critical to us. So when we engage with religious actors, we understand they are accountable to the human rights agenda, just as everybody else is. We also have to understand, and that's why we must work multi-religiously, because we cannot be manipulated by any one or the other as long as we're prioritizing the whole. It's easier to be manipulated when you have to stick to one or two or three at the expense of the others. I'm sorry, it's a global agenda that was predicated on the values common to all religions. So let's not pick and choose, let's not cherry pick, let's be deliberate. And that is the most contentious and challenging of terrains that we will be confronting now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karam. That's a lot to work with, but thank you first of all for putting the whole issue in perspective for us. And I think that much needed reminder to all of us to be humble. And the emphasis on multi-religiosity, and then also this issue of percolation from the field offices to the centers of policy making, which I hope that Ms. Heller will be able to deal with when we come to her intervention. Now I'd like to go to Dr. Abu Mogli to pick up on something else that you said, which is that, as I understand it, UNEP has been one of the first organizations to systematically engage with faith leaders, over 30, 40, 50 years ago. So from your perspective, what led to that choice? And also, if you could talk a little bit about what are some of the challenges that you may have encountered during that experience, you as an organization.
Thank you, Nayana, and greetings to all of my friends and participants. I wouldn't claim that UNEP was one of the first because Dr. Azza Karam is here and I don't want to offend her. But indeed, UNEP worked early on, actually started in the 80s to work with faith-based organizations. And in 1990, we launched something that is called the Green Sabbath, which is putting, no action to protect the environment. But let me talk about what we have been recently doing. And prior to COVID-19 started this March, UN reports and statistics indicated that only 23% of the 93 environmental related SDGs or SDG indicators are on track to meet the targets with the current trends that we are living. 68% of those indicators actually do not have enough data to assess progress. And 9% of those, there's no progress towards achieving the targets at all. So looking at Agenda 2030 and who should be part of it, we believe that it needs to be engaging all stakeholders and mobilizing untapped innovative partnerships. And this is where the role of non-governmental organizations has been recognized to be crucial, but the full spectrum of such organizations has not been adequately engaged. They have been working, but not as part of the whole moving towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So the faith players or the faith actors have not been included in the global movement towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, although they have been working on it for so long. So as Dr. Faisal mentioned, in many countries, spiritual beliefs and religions actually are the main drivers for cultures and values and social inclusions and political engagement and economic prosperity. So they are part of the development agenda. Now, faith actors are present in every corner of the world. Wherever you go, you would find a priest or an imam or a rabbi or what have you. So they have an unprecedented network of actors in the field that does not exist in any international organization. So in addition to this power of reach of faith actors, there is what we call the economic power of faith institutions. And let me give you some statistics to back up this claim. Well, 8% of the habitable land surface of Earth is owned by faith-based organizations. 5% of commercial forests are managed by faith-based organizations. In some European countries, it reaches up to 28%, like in Austria. 50% of schools worldwide and more than 65 in Africa are owned by faith-based organizations. Faith organizations own more TV and radio stations than the entire continent of Europe. And in the last couple of years, the increase in the investment of religions, and specifically in North America, has increased by 3,500% investment in general investments in making resources for those organizations. So for us, for the Faith for Earth initiative, which was started in 2017 by designing and launching the strategy for engaging with faith-based organization, it was an essential component to work on different aspects. First of all, work with the power, the inspirational and action of faith-based organizations to reaching out to everybody. And second, work on the economic power of investment and work on greening those investments. And finally, the objective is to bring the scientific evidence that the UN provides and bridge that with the spiritual teachings and the sacred scripts of religions and make them work together in terms of reaching out and solving environmental issues. Now, some of the challenges that we have faced, actually, some are internal and some are external. Internally, I had to spend a lot of efforts convincing my own colleagues and staff, why are we engaging with faith organizations and religions and so on? Outside, there are a number of perceptions. First of all, the perception of the UN in general, why are we engaging? But also the perception of faith leaders. What is the motive of the UN coming now and selling a charter or a new agenda? Is this a new religion? Are we all going to believe in the same values? And I agree very much with Dr. Azza. There are certain values that we all need to agree and abide to, which is basically the human rights-based approach. The final challenge that I am still facing is the sensitivities of governments to some religions or some faith leaders. And you know, some governments have rules and regulations. You cannot practice this religion here, and you cannot, you know, invite this leader there, and so on. So these are things that we are still grappling with, and hopefully with time and with this momentum of movement of faith organizations towards working with the international community to achieve the SDGs, I believe we can solve all of these challenges that we are facing now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for raising those three challenges. You know, the one of buy-in, of perception, and this need for an inclusive human rights framework, and working with governments around that context. So I'd like to now turn to Ms. Heller to discuss another of the points that was raised earlier, this issue of percolation. So from your experience working in post-conflict, post-disaster areas, what do you see? What has been your experience of working with FBOs or religious actors in your work?
Yeah, thanks, Nayana, and thanks to colleagues, friends in this panel. Really wonderful to see all of you again. I've listened with fascination to Aza and Iyad. You know, when I knew Aza when she was still young, and she was already very eloquent. Now I'm actually really scared to actually follow suit because of the beautiful coherence and eloquence of her speech. And I think that, yes, I'm dealing on a day-to-day basis with the realities on the ground, as Aza so eloquently described. And of course, I'm sitting in the Holy Land. I am in Jerusalem, and I'm confronted with I'd say the beauty and the negativity of and the complexity of religion every day. I've been working for the past almost 30 years in the UN in different incarnations, in very different environments. And I think that especially in the more complex environments like here in Palestine, but also in Haiti, in Sudan, in Pakistan, you're very aware of, you know, the importance of win-win. I think if we live in these very, very complex environments where people are devastated by disaster, where there is very little hope for a better future, where there is conflict, where there is crisis, I think not only is religion in its own right a very important I'd say lifeline for people to face the difficulties on a day-to-day basis, but I think also there is an enormous win-win in bringing religious organizations, UN institutions, you know, secular NGOs together, join hand in hand to really strive for a better future. And I think it's a very appropriate conversation to have on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. I mean, yes, Aza, you're right, we are, you know, very, very young, but at the same time, I also, you know, you could argue, are we celebrating or are we mourning the fact that we still so much need all of us to bring a better future to people? And I think also listening to Iyad and to where, you know, we're going with the achievement of the SDGs. I mean, we have a very steep road ahead. And from my perspective, you know, I have lots of examples of where we've been able to join hands to really make a difference in the lives of people. And, you know, of course, we do that here in Palestine also on a daily basis to just, you know, find ways to play that win-win, to look at the positivity in a situation that is just so gloomy. So to answer your question, I think that just a practical example perhaps from Haiti is, you know, from, you know, using or working very closely together with religious leaders locally to talk about disaster risk reduction, to talk about people's behavior, to talk about, you know, how people can prepare themselves, but even to using the church bells to announce that a tsunami is coming or that people need to get prepared for a hurricane. to using religious leaders to talk about tolerance and to talk about not judging people with a different nature or who have a different outlook on life, and to talking about HIV/AIDS and how important it is to not stigmatize people, but also to bring messages to people that we are necessarily not able to bring. I mean, we can bring as United Nations a lot of the standards and the practices and the policies, but the way religious leaders are ingrained in the community, religious organizations are ingrained in the community, we simply cannot reach those people the way the religious communities can. And I think that recognizing that, as Asa says, and not saying, oh, it is time to include, or no, we should be incredibly humble in what we're trying to achieve, and recognize that we're only a small player in a very complex, much bigger field. And I think that for me, that humbleness, and I think the recognition that there is a win-win in there, that there is a 1 + 1 = 3 is the recipe to achieve a change in behavior, in a change, and to kind of all work towards that same agenda of the SDGs. And so I'm so happy that this forum is here, because I think that what we need to show, none of us can have the arrogance to say that we are a solution to the problem. I think that we need to have that humbleness to recognize that there is only one Earth, one future for all of us, and that if one element of that fails, we collectively fail. There is no space for that arrogance. And I know that in the G20 discussions, Amina Mohammed, I'm so happy that she also spoke to this agenda, because I think, we very much, of course, also see her as the mother of the SDGs. And I think that, we need to repeat this mechanism, this message continuously, that there's only, in our unitedness that we will be able to achieve this agenda. So over back to you. I hope I provided some sort of response to your very difficult question.
You absolutely have, and I think that you, all three of you, Dr. Abu Mogli, Dr. Karam, and you have all made that link between the networks and the access of religious leaders, but also this role of religious leaders as kind of stewards or guardians of shared heritage, of acting as models for positive behavior. And those are all very critical points, and I thank you for bringing those up. I should also just mention for our participants that Ms. Heller's office and her work with FBOs is the topic of one of the films that we are showing in the week to come. The work that you do with livelihood issues in Palestine is the main topic of one of these films. So, I'd like to advise all our participants to watch out for that. And now I'd like to turn to Ms. Layman So, who represents World Vision, so one of the organizations that's actually implementing a lot of this work that we're talking about. And so my question to you, Ms. Layman So, would be basically, you've spoken a lot about the need for interfaith collaboration around the SDGs. So if you could talk a little bit about that from the perspective of your work, and also the unique added value that for you, religious actors bring to the Agenda 2030 debate.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I think if we think of SDGs, we need to acknowledge that there's much more than investment into infrastructure or services. There's actually a supposed change of attitudes and behavior that is very much between the lines of many, or sometimes expressed part of the SDGs. And so those mindsets and behaviors are directly linked to our values. And as we said, so many people identify themselves attached to a faith. It's obvious that faith considerations need to be part of us achieving the SDGs. Faith leaders across the world are moral authorities. So they're part of the community, they're known, and often they're some of the trusted people in societies where people don't trust the governments, they don't trust even NGOs, other people coming from the outside, but they trust their own people, they know them, and faith leaders are those. And the faith leaders know the issues of the communities, faith leaders know the most vulnerable of the communities, and they can discern and see how faith and spirituality related root causes are linked to behaviors, and then articulate that, use that in their influence. So they're key influences for the change of social norms and behaviors, which is a critical aspect to achieve any of our SDGs. Recently, we had research done in Ghana where we showed that we have improved timing and spacing of pregnancies simply by involving faith leaders in the project. Very simple, but so involving them more actively brings much better results. Or currently with the COVID response, I mean, if you think of what faith organizations are doing, it's just amazing. Sure, they are doing all the health messages that we need to get out, but they're doing much more. They're strengthening the child protection systems and referrals. They're dealing with mental health, psychosocial support. They're connecting to economic opportunities and livelihood support. They're advocating for education systems for vulnerable populations. They give support for caregivers in positive parenting skills. They educate from home resources, etc., etc. The list goes on and on. So the role of faith organizations, of faith actors, is really critical. Now, World Vision is a Christian organization, and an advantage of that is that we have a holistic view of needs of people, their physical, emotional, economic, but also their spiritual needs. In World Vision specifically, we define poverty as linked mainly to broken relationships. Might be new to many of you, but so we talk about linked broken relationships with God, with ourselves, our individual self of agency, stewardship, or responsibility, with others, with the environment. And so again, thinking of SDGs, you can't go towards goals without addressing fundamental relationships in communities, nations, and the world.
Thank you so much for making that link between relationships and the SDGs, because I think that's also something that we've all been discussing, but also for highlighting, trust, knowledge, and the religious community's role in behavior modification, and for those really concrete examples from your work of where you've seen this happen. It's very much appreciated. As I told our panelists before, we have a long list of questions to get through, and I don't think that we're going to get to all of them, but I'd like to maybe go one round with all of our panelists and ask you to keep your answers short. I know it's difficult with a topic like this, but perhaps I'll begin with Your Excellency Faisal bin Muammar. So SDG 16, peaceful and inclusive societies, that's something that comes up a lot in KAICIID's work. So I was wondering if you could tell us from your perspective the role of interreligious dialogue and religious communities in peace building and what you've seen from KAICIID's work.
Well, I can talk for hours about KAICIID and all the things we've done, but I would like to mention something, which is maybe I have to be careful in saying it, because I remember when we started 2005, it was the difficult time where so many things is under mistrust. Okay, let me call it this way. That time, it was really in the past, there were deadly mistakes by ignoring the role of religious leaders and religious institutions. And because of so many things, I don't want really to mention all of it, but being in the West for a long time, I saw myself where many policymakers, they keep distance from religious institutions and religious leaders. And the other side, where we come from, there is so many things governing the life of the people under the umbrella of religion, every single things. But they lack so many things. They lack the institutional structure. So it was really for them, it's part of their daily life. You will never see, or maybe most of the institutions, there is no governing structure where is, you can apply accountability and so many things. So what happened from the other side, they were called as the cause of the problem. And from the other side, and that's what we started at KAICIID, we say they should be part of the solution. So it was really, so what I can say that we need really to double our work to build the trust. And that's very, very important, because we cannot work without them in any area in the world, especially in developing area. We need a lot of dialogue. Many of them, they are suspicious about so many things. We have to really bring them to the stage where they can trust what we are bringing to them. It is easy to talk about faith-based organizations in the West because there is a structure, and according to the law and according to so many things, and there is a separation between religion and the state, and it is really clear line, and that's really the structure of. So this is what we faced in KAICIID. I don't want to bring so many stories, but I remember even going to the UN, and I hope my UN friends here don't get upset from me, but I was knocking all the door 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12. Even when I met, I remember with His Excellency, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and it was really, if I publish that meeting, it was really going to be really very fascinating stories. But it is really now, it is better late than never. We are really celebrating something where the UN, through so many entities, are coming now to say, okay, these people are there, should be included. We should really do something. And that is really one of the fastest way to get the trust and to implement the projects, because without it, I remember being with Religion for Peace with Dr. Findley in Uganda. We were trying to promote some vaccine and things. And the story there, it was fascinating. When we started talking to religious leaders, their help will shorten our, and will save us a lot of money. And their influence is more than the health authorities themselves, to promote the vaccine. So we should really do that. I can tell you now, being in the region where mostly Muslim country, when you talk about religious institutions, they are afraid sometimes to introduce themselves or to introduce their projects, because they might be classified that they are labeled as extremists, for example. And this is really very dangerous. If we don't include them, then they will go to the other side. That's a political issue, very political. But we need really to build the trust. And even what Dr. Azza mentioned about the human rights issue, I know there is a huge debate about this issue, but there is no way to go over it except through dialogue, except through bringing them to the dialogue table and gaining their trust. If we gain their trust, then I can assure you, we can remove all the dust. I call it the dust because it's really polluting the minds, and nothing like gossiping and stereotellings, and to say, oh, this is coming under the umbrella of these Western institutions, and they want to promote something like this, or la, 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 la. So this will kill all the projects. So I call for, not doubling, I wish we had hundreds of KAICIID or Religion for Peace, and many FPOs working in everywhere in the world. And that's what we try to do at KAICIID. And I hope this video tape or the work we've done the last 2 years will really contribute to bring us closer to you and to the others.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And just to highlight that one point that you made about the importance of context, which I think is perhaps new to the discussion, and the fact that the engagement between FBOs and policy actors is really not the same from country to country and from part of the world to part of the world, and that really needs to be taken into account when we have these discussions. So thank you for that. For my next question, I'd like to go to Dr. Abu Mogli. So I've been reading a lot about the possibility that, the one thing that this pandemic has been good for is really mitigating perhaps climate change, at least in the short term, although it looks like even that is disputed. So there's been a lot of discussion about, how we build back better, more sustainably from an environmental point of view. How do you think that religious actors can step up their engagement around that debate?
Well, thank you, Nayana, for this important question. And I agree with you that the silver lining that COVID-19 provided for the environment can be disputed. And it depends on what angle are you looking. Is it pollution? Is it climate change? Is it waste, for example, which has increased, especially medical waste? Well, if I build on what I mentioned in the first question on the economic power of faith-based organizations, and if we consider institutions or faith institutions to be a country, they would have the size of India and Mexico together, okay, in terms of land mass. And if we consider their economic power, they would have more power, economic power, than the entire continent of Africa. So this is what the size that we are dealing with. In addition, of course, these figures can be debated, but we know that there are around 35 million churches around the world, 4 million mosques, dozens of millions of temples that are buildings. In fact, they are buildings. They consume energy, they consume water, they consume area, and so on. So faith institutions have the moral responsibility to green their own assets and investments. So greening these assets will contribute to major reduction of negative environmental impacts. So imagine if you install a solar unit on each of the millions of these houses of worship. Immediately you're talking about a reduction of hundreds of thousands of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It is also important to promote investment in nature for improved human health and sustainable socioeconomic recovery. 2 weeks ago, over a period of 4 days, we held the Faith for Nature conference with the participation of high-level faith leaders and 450 faith actors from around the world. And the basic essence and focus of the conference was to promote climate-friendly and nature-based solutions based on the moral and spiritual principles of religions, and using the traditional knowledge that the faith communities already have, because they have been working across, all over the world in implementing nature-based solutions without calling them that, and without being, scaled up or used in other places. So faith organizations, actually, if we talk about the current environmental problems that have started with COVID-19, which is the medical waste that has reached our oceans and our lands and rivers and waters and what have you, the faith organizations own, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, more than 40% of the health service providers. So immediately we should work with those service providers from the religious institutions to sustainably manage and the waste that is generated, not only as medical waste, but also as wastewater, solid waste, and what have you, and employ what we call the circular economy in recycling and reusing what we have there. One example is the Living Chapel that we have launched with the Vatican, and it is currently installed in the Botanical Garden of Rome, where this chapel was completely constructed from recycled material. and the water is regenerated water. It uses solar energy to power the system, and so on. So there are examples that can be used. So the faith actors can play a major role in advocacy, not only issuing declarations and so on, but also in taking the leadership in commitments and being the leaders in the implementation of the new norm or the future we want. So the final point that I want to make is faith leaders has a role to play in environmental governance. Before I started the initiative 3 or 4 years ago, we only had 8 organizations represented in the UN Environment Assembly. Currently, we have more than 50. That is not only a number, but it is a powerful voice in the highest decision-making body on environmental issues, which is the UN Environment and its Assembly. So we need to be on the table with decision makers in discussing and integrating spiritual and moral values in whatever decisions and strategies we come up with. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for highlighting the role of religious organizations and religious leaders, not just in advocacy, but in concrete action. So I'd like to repeat that one sentence that you said: faith institutions have the moral responsibility to green their own premises and their own investments. And I think that that's a really great takeaway from that. I'd like to now turn to Ms. Lehman So to talk a little bit more about what you already mentioned in your first intervention. So World Vision and other FBOs are also involved in sustainable development, such as industry, innovation, responsible production and reduction, economic growth, etc. So what are the unique challenges and opportunities for FBO engagement that they can bring to these conversations? And how can we better understand the unique contributions and build cross-sectoral partnerships?
There's so many opportunities, and with every opportunity come challenges. So just to go back to a few of them is, I think the large extent to where faith is a real decisive influencer for decision making, informing our behavior, informing behavior change, motivating, and mainly sustaining changed behavior is already a huge thing that we can use. I think about environmental behavior change. If you have understood that with your faith values, it's actually in line to adopt a certain behavior and then sustain it, you can do that. The same applies for ending violence against children or whatever area. And once you connect the faith value to the change of behavior that you want, the social norm or the individual behavior, and then you get the different levels involved at family level, but then at community level, the faith leaders, be it the pastor, the imam, wherever it is, sustain that change, that link to the value of your name, that sustains the change, and over time this becomes part of the new culture of a village, a family, and even our global village as well. Now there's a few challenges that I think we are getting there, that we grow out of it, but I still think that we are prone to promote our own camp first and see a difference more as a divisive thing than an enriching aspect. And if we as faith actors can't cross that bridge, it will be very difficult for us to be an authentic partner for secular mindsets that see us often more as a liability or risk because we have so diverging views, or fight with our elbows more than joining hands in it. So I think that's a real challenge. We are getting better. I mean, this panel is proof that we are getting much better. But the perception of non-faith people who are more secular minded don't necessarily see us that way. So I think we need to continue to show the value that the faith actors bring. I think some of those statistics that were mentioned are only known to very few people. They are not common knowledge. They are not in our school books. They are not discussed. They are not shared in big meetings. The other thing which I think has to do with ourselves is we believe the tale of the secular world that faith is not relevant to development. We have believed the language of secular mindsets that once you're educated, faith is irrelevant. It becomes irrelevant. And look at this panel, they're all very intelligent, well-educated people, and still our personal faith is so critical to our own life, to our well-being, how we engage, why we engage, motivation of it. And I think we sometimes hold back and withdraw into our corners because we still think that that secular tale of you don't need faith once you're educated is still somewhere in us. So how can we assert our faith identity as individuals, as groups, and say it is by asserting it in the respect that we have differences in it, but there's a lot of things we share in common. Our shared humanity, our shared engagement for vulnerable children, so many other things are there that we share. And then we can actually use our faith as an asset to achieve development goals, not own that message that faith is a liability. So I think that's for me one thing that we can have control over, how we deal with other people, how we show ourselves externally of being more united, and also asserting our faith identity, even in panels that are secular, to assert that and show it as an asset. So I know we are close in time, so I'll limit it to just that.
Thank you so much. And also for framing your challenges as really concrete recommendations for behavior change within religious communities themselves. And for seeing, that was, I think, the first time that a challenge was pointed out for secular organizations working with religious institutions. So thank you also for pointing out that there might be challenges on that side as well. I'd like to now move to Ms. Heller with a question that's dear to a lot of our hearts here, which is the topic of the video that we worked on with you was also livelihood improvement, but not just livelihood improvement, but was very rooted in gender. So if you could talk a little bit about, where gender plays into all of this, and that's something that hasn't come up so far, but if you could explore that just a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it's gender.
In a minute, please, if that's.
I'm going to say. I'm looking at Azza, and I think that for the past 30 years, of course, I've been working on the whole agenda of inclusion of women in political dialogue, in improvement of communities, in all walks of life, in everything that we do. And so I think that from my perspective as UNDP, we, whether it is, we start, of course, with the analysis, we look at, the data, we look at culture, we look at behavior, we look at all these different elements to make sure that what we do is inclusive, promotes the agenda of women, promotes, the role of women, whether it's in political spheres or as mothers, as caregivers, as heads of households, or as, professionals in every walk of life. So for us, this is really critically important. And I think that if you now look at the COVID-19 outbreak, and we're so concerned because we see increased numbers of GBV, a lot of violence against women and girls, a lot of abuse, but also we see that COVID is actually pushing more than ever women into poverty. And this is something that we're really concerned about. I mean, the data we have now says that 47 million women and girls are, going below the poverty line. And COVID-19 has the risk of, derailing all the progress we've made with regards to leaving no one behind and increasing, improving people's lives and moving people above that poverty line. So I think that for us is really something that we're hugely worried about, of course. I can give so many examples of where we're really trying to make a difference in the lives of women and girls in Palestine. And I'm not sure that that's really, very relevant for the conversation today, but I think that the most important is that in everything we do, we are mindful that all the actions we take have a different impact on women and girls, and that you cannot be gender blind in any decision that you make. And that, whether it is in your household surveys, your data collection, everything related to the impact of our work on women and girls needs to be recognized and needs to be centerpiece in the development that we undertake. And so I think that we, for example, in Gaza, we've been working so much on dignified jobs, and what we see is that 85% of the women graduates in Gaza are unemployed. Why is that? Why is it so hard for women to enter the labor market? What is it that we can do to make a difference in the lives of these women and make them, more employable, and also allow them to access that labor market more readily? So is it through specific programs? Is it by making sure that their CVs are more compatible? Is it by making sure that in the interviews they present themselves better? Everything that we do through the programs, with the Qatari government, the Dynamic Futures, our dignified job program, with a multitude of donors, we are constantly looking at how can we push women entrepreneurs, how we can support them, how can we support women SMEs, women-led SMEs. So from my perspective, we do not succeed in development if we don't put women at the center stage. Women are, first of all, 50% of the population, but they carry such a weight. And I think that in this current COVID-19 crisis, you cannot step away from the devastating effect that this has on women and girls. So I can't be more passionate about this than I am right now, because I think that the moment we do not take that into consideration, we might as well not act. Because I think actually then we run the risk of doing more harm than good. So for me, what we see right now and the impact of COVID-19, all the gains we've made on women's empowerment, on, making sure that women play that meaningful role that they're meant to play, it can be undone by this COVID-19 crisis. So we have to be very, very deliberate in what we do.
Thank you so much. I'm keenly aware that this topic of gender, faith, and the SDGs could really be its own conference, really. So I'm very deeply appreciative of you for bringing that point across and making sure that it was included. For our last question, so I'd like to return to the films that we are actually here to launch. These videos, these films really explore or outline the stories of organizations working very much at the grassroots, working with very limited resources, working occasionally, I think, relatively in isolation in some cases. So to Dr. Azza Karam, my question is, as having worked both on the sort of secular policy level and now as the Secretary General of Religions for Peace, to organizations like this who are working towards contributing to the SDGs, perhaps in their own limited way, what advice would you have for them? What recommendations would you have for them, for our participants here today, for how they can engage with international policy actors, whether it's in fundraising, whether it's in getting involved in those conversations? What can they do?
Forgive me, Nayana, what can who do? I didn't get that part of your question, forgive me.
The grassroots community level faith-based actors who are really the ones who are working directly on these issues.
Great. Well, it's a wonderful question. I just want to affirm what all of our distinguished speakers have said on the panel, Dr. Faisal and Dr. Iyad and Yvonne and Esther, and really just commit to the understanding that at the core of so much of the work that we will be judged on, history will judge us all on, especially those of us who are championing the engagement with faith agenda, will be to what extent have we actually been able to work with these actors to raise up the dignity of every single human being, men and women, but also other gender identities in this space, because human beings are created different per definition. So I think we will be judged on this. And I think I completely agree with Yvonne that what we're actually seeing now is COVID presenting us with a fast forwarding of this particular challenge. Will it be enough to have worked with religious actors to try to safeguard the environment at the expense of what's going on with women in their lives and other gender oppression and discrimination that's taking place at a fast forwarded speed as well? That's why I think it's important to acknowledge and value the role that people like Dr. Faisal have played in being one of the 900 delegates in August of last year who actually elected a woman to head Religions for Peace's 50-year-old multi-religious movement around the world. I think that shows a tremendous courage and dedication on the part of largely male religious leaders to see this issue of womanhood and women in leadership of these very, very large bastions of patriarchy. That is a massive move and a mental shift. And I think those are the kinds of things, Nayana, that give a very concrete message to everybody that faith communities are not only the stereotyped version of men in robes who don't like women and have a very, problematic perspective, but you can see in the vibrancy that Dr. Faisal was very much part of in Lindau in August, you can see in the vibrancy of religious leaders, male and female, coming together to elect a woman. You can see there a massive change in mental attitudes, commitments, aspirations, and accountability, because they are holding themselves accountable to this decision that they make together to be led in their multi-religious endeavors by a woman, and in this case a woman from the South, and in this case a Muslim woman. So really all the no, please no's are there together in one place. So I think it's important to look at this because it's not simply symbolic, even though the symbolism of it is deeply powerful, but it is marking a change in attitudes within the religious communities and movements that I think both Dr. Iyad and Ivana spoke to, that this accountability within the religious establishments themselves to be different, to behave, to show a different approach, and look at what the encyclical of the Pope speaks to, the one before on the environment, the one now on fraternity. Serious attitudinal, behavioral, transformative calls to action. And this last encyclical is based on a journey that has taken place between Al-Azhar from the Muslim world, which is so to speak, the Vatican of the Muslim world, Sunni Muslim world, and the Vatican, a journey of engagement, discursive, emotional, programmatic, to come up with an agenda and a call to all the two largest religions of the world, calling upon all religious and secular to attend to the fact that we need to be fundamentally transformative in how we relate to one another and how we hold our institutions and ourselves accountable. So this is the kind of change. It takes two hands to clap. The fear that is now very inherent in so many secular institutions from religion and religious engagement, because they see how religions are percolating as a key agenda issue, as key partners. So there's a backlash. There's a secular backlash within the secular institutions. At the same time, there's also a masculine backlash against the women rising to positions of prominence globally, including in religious fora. And we mustn't believe that these two things are not, that the backlash is a normal part of the transformative space we are in today. So crises like COVID, which are global, accentuate the good, but also the backlashes. So we must appreciate that actually the backlash is hard. It has to be dealt with, together. It won't work if we're all working in our silos or competing with one another. That won't help us deal with anything. That will actually make things worse. But yet that seems to be a natural tendency, that we must come together more as that's why my first point, it's the multi-stakeholder, multi-religious, multi-civic approach that needs to take place, because that's how you serve and save the multi-governmental or the multilateral. It takes all of these hands to clap. But I think we are at this moment where we have to be aware of the fact that we won't change as one institution, no matter how radical it is. It won't be enough to change and to bring about the saving of very basic rights that has taken so many generations to achieve, that we owe each other an accountability. Now, religious communities are not all smelling of roses, no matter how much their political or financial capital is. There are many issues within religious communities and institutions. Let's be realistic and pragmatic about that. Let's hold religious institutions accountable to what it is that they can do well and where they can do better. And in holding the religious institutions accountable, let's make sure that the political and the social and the economic institutions, including our UN actors, are also held equally accountable. This is a moment of crisis. It's also a moment where we can each have to be held accountable, but we can support one another in the multi-stakeholdership to be more accountable to one another. There is no perfect solution here. What the religious actors together, and they are very diverse. We're talking to them about them. They're very diverse. There's no such thing as them in the religious world. What religious actors and institutions can do when they work together well, when they signify to the secular and non-religious world what a difference they can make by collaborating, that's the key indicator of success of religious engagement. It's not when the Vatican does a mighty fine job, or when Al-Azhar does a mighty fine job, or when the Buddhist Sangha in country X does a mighty fine job. That's not necessarily enough. That's nowhere near enough. It's when they can work together that we see that religions may well have a chance at helping us save the rest of the community. But if religions are busy competing and backbiting, then I'm sorry, nothing changes, more of the same. So let's personify and let's appreciate that the religious movements have a remarkable call to action right now, way beyond moral. It's basic. What Religions for Peace is realizing through its different engagements in different countries is the very basic needs for food, water, shelter, basic, are accentuated a million times over. People need these basic needs. When they see the religious communities coming together with others to serve them, that moment is more than just a basic need provision. That is the provision of dignity that is being done collectively by all actors. We hold all of us accountable to that dignity, not one more than the other, because that's the whole point of not being judgmental gets completely shattered. We are all standing vis-a-vis a divine with an accountability there too. None of us is better than the other, not even the one who's holding a holy book in their hand. We are accountable by our actions. And that's why I keep saying to many of our interreligious colleagues, don't begin the wheel all over again. Just be able to appreciate that there is so much that has already been done. Acknowledge that, build on that, celebrate that. It isn't how much money we have that distinguishes the religious world. It's not how much political influence we have that distinguishes the political world. Just like it's not how much money any one government has that will distinguish it. It's not how much political power any one government has that will distinguish it. It's how accountable are we to our basic principles, which are the human rights, and how capable are we of working together in spite of our differences. Those are the criteria we hold ourselves accountable to, and which we should judge the work we do in this moment and for the next few years.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karam, for that call for accountability and for multi-religious collaboration. Something that you said went back to what Her Excellency Dr. Aminata Touré, the former Prime Minister of Senegal, mentioned at a conference of the G20 Interfaith Forum last week. She spoke about faith actors coming to the rescue of multilateralism. And I think that's something that I also picked up from your intervention. So I'm afraid we really don't have any more time, but I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Ms. Heller, Dr. Karam, Dr. Abu Mogli, Ms. Lehman So, and Your Excellency Faisal bin Muammar, for your interventions, for the excellent points that you raised, for the many, many concrete examples that you brought to the table, and for giving us all so much to think about, and giving us enough material really to have held 7 or 8 panel discussions of equal, if not greater length. Thank you to all of our participants who have stayed with us, even though this discussion has run longer than its time, which is, I think, also testament to the quality of the interventions here. And I'd like to just point out to all of you that this event is the launch of a week-long film festival, if you like, where you can watch the videos that our team has produced, which really profile concrete stories like the ones we've been talking about today. So details of that are available on our website, and we hope to see many of you there as well. But until then, once again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for your time.
We would like to thank you, Nayana, for moderating this session. You did very well.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks to Dr. Yvonne and Dr. Esther Liman, and to Dr. Azza, and to you, Dr. Ayad. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا الله معكم.
Your Excellency.
See you.
Bye. مع السلامة.